In mid-May of 2022, Finland and then Sweden announced that the two nations wanted to join the NATO alliance, abandoning their many years of neutrality for NATO protection and marking a new age for both countries. So why do Sweden and Finland want to join NATO? What's the history of the two when it comes to their security? How will this impact Russia and the NATO alliance as a whole? And what is the main problem for them to join? A quick background of the two nations. Both are located in Northern Europe and each share a coastline along the Baltic Sea. Combined with their neighbour Norway, along with Denmark and Iceland, they form the Nordic countries. Combining all of them together, they are over 1.3 million square miles. This is largely due to Greenland that Denmark administrates. Individually, Sweden is just over 173,000 square miles, making the country bigger than Uzbekistan in Central Asia, yet smaller than Papua New Guinea in Oceania. Finland is a little smaller. At just over 130,000 square miles, that makes the country a little larger than Vietnam in Southeast Asia, yet smaller than the Republic of Congo in Central Africa. To understand why they both want to join NATO, breaking their neutrality, we have to understand why they were neutral in the first place and the challenges that the countries had to endure in order to keep their neutrality. Let's start with Sweden. For Sweden, the country's last war was in 1814, when Norway, which was supposed to join the union with Sweden, refused, instead declaring independence, sparking the war. Sweden then won this, although most Norwegians didn't like the union, and it eventually broke up in 1905, despite outrage from the Swedish government. The public strongly was against war at the time, and so the Swedish government was forced to back down, and Norwegian independence was now a fact. From there, during World War I, Imperial Germany attempted to persuade the Swedes to enter the war in exchange for land in the Baltics, or maybe Finland, although Sweden never really took these offers seriously. Towards the end of the conflict, its new neighbour, Finland, would create tensions as Sweden sought to take the Åland Islands, a group of Swedish-speaking islands in the Baltic Sea, which Finland wanted to keep. And so, after the League of Nations intervened and decided that Finland should keep them, with autonomy, the next issue for Sweden was the Second World War. In November of 1939, the Soviet Union invaded its Finnish neighbour, and so, whilst the Swedish government declared neutrality, many Swedes themselves were sympathetic to the Finns and helped them by giving them food aid, and even volunteering to fight for the Finns against the Soviet invader. In April of 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, putting the country in a difficult position. Sweden allowed German troops for its territory in the north to help out Finland, yet it did help train Danish exiles to help them prepare to liberate their country. Sweden very much did things for both sides, but by the end of the Second World War, Sweden now had no real challenges to the country's neutrality and independence. For Finland, the country's history and its neutrality is more complicated. The country used to be a Grand Duchy with some autonomy, but within the Russian Empire. However, towards the end of the First World War, Finland broke away from Russia and became an independent republic. From here, disputes between the Bolshevik-backed socialists and German-backed conservatives led to a short civil war. Upon its end, the Conservatives won, and from here, Finland got involved in the Estonian War for Independence when they sent volunteers, whilst also sending some money to the East Karelians who had risen up in Eastern Karelia wanting to join Finland, although this was eventually quelled. From here, Finland declared neutrality, and its relations with the wider world began to improve. The country signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviets, which gave it a sense of security in 1932. Although during World War II, this wasn't enough to keep the country safe. In October of 1939, the Soviets began to negotiate with the Finns, uncomfortable with the border so close to Leningrad. However, the Finns, during negotiations, eventually shelled the small village of Mainila, creating a pretext for the Soviets to invade Finland. Although later, it was clear that the incident was staged by the Soviet Union to justify an aggressive war against Finland. Either way, Helsinki was bombed and Soviet troops poured across the border into the Finnish nation. After weeks of heavy fighting, the Soviets lost a staggering amount of troops, whilst the Finnish were on the brink of total collapse. And so the country decided to sign a peace treaty with the Soviets, in exchange for losing about 9% of its territory. From here, democratic Finland sought closer ties with totalitarian Nazi Germany, largely because it didn't have a choice. In June 1941, the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, and 3 days later, the continuation war began. whereby Finland launched an offensive to retake much of its lost territory, including some more land that it ever got in East Karelia. After 3 more years of fighting, Finland was exhausted, so eventually the country then signed an armistice with the Soviets, requiring a large amount of reparations, to accept responsibility for the war, but most importantly turned against their former ally, Nazi Germany. The Lapland War had begun. At first, the Finns attempted to just avoid confrontation and just tell the Nazis to leave quickly, but the slow evacuation and pressure from the Soviets forced the Finns to engage in minor skirmishes with the retreating German forces. However, things got personal when Adolf Hitler himself viewed the Finnish exit from the war against Bolshevism as a great betrayal, ordering his retreating German forces to burn important parts of Finnish areas to the ground in retaliation. After months more of largely light fighting, Finland officially declared war on Nazi Germany in March of 1945. From there, it drove out the remaining German troops by late April of 1945. Finland's final war was over at last. This being the case, the country declared neutrality again, but soon found itself on the front lines of a new war, the Cold War, whilst its Swedish neighbour provoked both sides, condemning the US's involvement in Vietnam, yet sheltering many Eastern Bloc defectors. Finland attempted to avoid confrontation between the two sides. This policy worked, and both sides respected the policy that would soon become to be known as Finlandisation. In it, Finland would not critique other countries' foreign policies. From here, relations with the Soviets began to improve. A friendship treaty was signed in 1948. Finland also soon got its navy base at Porkala back in 1956. Despite the lease supposedly being set to expire in 1994, Finland also hosted the 1975 summit between the West and the Soviet Union. As the Soviet Union loosened its grip on its occupied territories, the Baltic states began to break away. Finland, in order not to provoke its Soviet neighbour, initially hesitated in recognising their independence, but soon did. From there, the Soviet Union disintegrated, and both Sweden and Finland began to develop more close ties to the West. They first joined the NATO Partnership for Peace initiative in 1994, then the European Union the following year, whilst Finland abandoned its currency, the Finnish marka, and replaced it with the euro in 2002. Both countries sent troops to Afghanistan to attempt to stabilise the Islamic Republic from the Taliban and its allies. Both Sweden and Finland condemned Russia's actions in 2008 and 2014 in both Georgia and Ukraine. But 2022 finally saw the two countries go over the edge when it came to their neutrality. Russia's willingness to use force to solve their disputes showed that the two countries were vulnerable to a Russian attack. Both decided to apply to join NATO, meaning that Article 5, which states that an attack on one member constitutes an attack on all, would apply to both countries, giving both a strong sense of security, as they would now know that 30 other countries would rush to their aid in case of a hostile attack. Next, what impact will this have on both the NATO alliance and Russia? Well, firstly, it would change the power balance in Northern Europe. Both Sweden and Finland are liberal democratic countries, and so will fit well within the other surrounding like-minded countries. Whilst both countries have ruled out permanent military bases and nuclear weapons on their soil, this leaves open room for temporary military bases to be installed in either or both countries. The main issues for Russia will firstly be its military routes. Its ships will have to go through narrower passes in the Baltic Sea in order to avoid Sweden's territorial waters. With Gotland's strategic position in the Baltic Sea, it will mean Russia's navy will have an even harder time trying to get through the Baltic undetected. But a much larger problem for Russia will be Finland joining. Firstly, Russia will not only have to deal with another 800 plus miles of border, but facilities within Russia will become much more harder to defend if a potential war with it and the NATO alliance broke out. You see, Russia has a number of ballistic and nuclear storage bases in the Kolar Peninsula. The only potential NATO member that could get there and capture them before they could be used would be Norway. The only problem is the short border between Russia and Norway makes it much easier for Russia to defend them. But if Finland joins, the country could attack potentially anywhere in the front. The marshy, forested terrain makes the area perfect for sneaking troops in and dealing with the weapons. So obviously, this would be a massive advantage for NATO, but not every NATO member wants to allow the two to join. You see, to join NATO, you need all members to agree, and so all 30 need to agree. Well, one of them doesn't. Turkey, the only Asian member of NATO, has announced that it will block NATO membership for the two. So why? Well, the problem lies with two main issues. Firstly, in 2019, Turkey invaded a large piece of northern Syria, causing chaos for the local people. It did this for several reasons, but the main reason was that the country had been housing millions of Syrians for many years now, with little outside help from the wider world. And many Turks wanted them to go back to Syria. The problem was, it wasn't safe yet, and so by sending in troops to take the areas, the military would establish a small corridor to settle Syrians in a safe place. Sweden and Finland condemned the military invasion of northern Syria and banned arms sales to Turkey, which it is strongly angered by. The second main issue are the main majority people of the areas in North Syria that Turkey invaded back in 2019, the Kurds. Many of these people have been fighting for independence/autonomy from Turkey using force, as many live in Turkey and feel that they are oppressed by the Turks. Sweden has a long history of supporting Kurdish groups through funding and sheltering them. Turkey sees many of these Kurdish groups that Sweden supports as terrorists, and has highlighted that if the two were to become allies, then why should the country allow it to join NATO if it supports terrorist groups? For Finland, it's pretty much the same thing, but due to a lesser extent, as Finland does host a much smaller amount of Kurds, which may or may not be linked with the groups Turkey considers terrorists. Although, a small group of NATO countries said that it will come to the aid of the two if they are attacked by anyone, Sweden and Finland still remain vulnerable now that they have expressed willingness to abandon neutrality, picking a side and making them a target for Russia. If they don't make a deal with Turkey soon that will allow them into the alliance, they may tragically end up being in the same situation as the country that is the reason that they are joining: Ukraine. I hope you found the video informative and interesting. Please like it if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, thanks for watching.